Go for
Am
it.
I starting now?
Yeah, go for it.
Oh, okay, I can't tell. Good evening. My name is Kate James, and I'm the Executive Director at Concord Art in Concord, Mass. We, in the last 6 months, have started a wonderful lecture series, and tonight we're welcoming Amy Wynne, who's one of our wonderful teachers, but I will let Marissa introduce her. I just wanted to let you know how grateful we all are at Concord Art for all your support and for seeing us through this pandemic. We've depended on you as members, as people, as donors, and as students, and it's been incredible for us to be able to work for you and for you to sustain us through this period. So we're very grateful, and we hope that we have been giving you the programming and the art experiences that you need and that you enjoy. Thank you so much. And I'd like Marissa to take it away. Marissa is our programs manager at Concord Art, and she has created this lecture series, and we're very proud of her. She's done a great job. So thank you, Marissa.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Kate. Thanks, everyone, for being here. I'm just going to give a couple housekeeping notes before we start. If you've been to a talk with us before, you know that you can use the chat feature at any point during the lecture to ask Amy a question. We'll be monitoring that chat box, and we'll facilitate that Q&A at the end. So don't feel like you have to wait until Q&A. If something bubbles up for you, throw it in the chat. We'll get to it later. Otherwise, we have a couple great programs coming up. You might have saw it in the slideshow. Stay tuned. There's more great talks coming. And tonight we have a great program I'm excited to introduce to you. Tonight, Amy, our speaker, is not only an accomplished artist and maker, but a beloved Concord Art teacher. Amy Wynne lives and works out of Pawtucket, Rhode Island. She holds an MFA in painting from the New York Academy in New York City and a dual BA in art history and cultural anthropology from Smith College. Amy's work has been exhibited and collected across the nation, and she's been teaching for over 25 years. As an artist, Amy strives to embody a creative spark. And we know firsthand that she does by sharing her work and teaching with us. So thank you for being here. Welcome, we're excited to have you. And without any further ado, I'll introduce to you our speaker for the night, Amy Wynne.
Thanks, Marissa, and thanks, Kate. So I'm so happy to be here with you. I am excited to share some of my thoughts on creative resilience and especially at this challenging time, how I've navigated that in my creative practice, and really just in hopes to be helpful and possibly inspire it in others. But before we start, I'd like to start this talk the way I start every single one of my classes, which is with a short centering. So if you'd like to just take your seat, and if you feel comfortable doing it, you can just close your eyes for a minute. And just take a minute to arrive, feeling the weight of your body in your chair. And maybe noticing some of the sounds that are around you, maybe something far away, maybe something in the next room. Connecting briefly with the senses to help us arrive in the now. You might also notice any sensations like the temperature of the air on the back of your hands. And then taking 3 deep breaths, we can again move into arriving. So breathing in deeply, letting it go. Breathing in again, letting it go. And then one more deep breath and letting it go. And just taking one more second to acknowledge this creative community. You showing up tonight for this is this great opportunity to share ideas. So thank you so much for coming. And you can open your eyes if you have them closed. And here we are. So I am excited to share this presentation I created and talk a little bit. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to share my screen. And here it is. All right, creative resilience, strategies for hope and flow. So I like to think of resilience meaning adapting well in the face of adversity. And I like to think of adaptation as a creative act. So what I'd like to really share with you tonight is, what's really most alive for me right now in my practice, how slowing down and creating a daily ritual of making has helped me stay resilient in challenging times. This has made me more hopeful. It's helped me maintain my creative flow over the years. And lately, this has also been an opportunity to hold the space for others to find their resilience through a daily practice. First, I'd like to read this poem. Poetry is actually one way that I stay resilient, both like writing a little bit of it, but also reading it. So this poem by Ada Limon, Instructions on Not Giving Up. More than the fuchsia funnels breaking out of the crabapple tree, more than the neighbor's almost obscene display of cherry limbs shoving their cotton candied blossoms to the slate sky of spring rains. It's the greening of the trees that really gets to me. When all the shock of white and taffy, the world's baubles and trinkets leave the pavement strewn with the confetti of aftermath, the leaves come. Patient, plodding, a green skin growing over whatever winter did to us. A return to the strange idea of continuous living despite the mess of us, the hurt, the empty. Fine then, I'll take it, the tree seems to say. A new slick leaf unfurling like a fist to an open palm. I'll take it. So I'm going to talk about 3 strategies tonight. 1, come to your senses. 2, practice a daily ritual. And 3, build creative community. In order to understand how pivotal a daily practice has been for me, I just want to back up a little bit. Some of you know where I'm coming from, some of you don't. I want to just give you a little background on me. So I studied, as Marissa mentioned, at the New York Academy of Art in the 90s, and I studied Renaissance techniques in painting and drawing. We learned all the muscles of the body. We did human dissections. I mean, it was really full on. And I acquired great skills. And this training is still the scaffolding of my work. I still consider it that, regardless of how my work has evolved over time. The rigor of that training taught me about seeing and also showed me that I had creative stamina. When I left New York, I started to travel more. I lived in Thailand and I painted in Italy, and I fell in love with landscape painting. Um, I love just to hike out to these vistas and depict just the fleeting beauty around me. And however, along with my heavy plein air easel that I would hike out with, I have to admit, I would also carry the ghosts of the academy on my shoulders. So I would set out with so much ambition, putting so much pressure on myself to achieve a quote unquote successful painting. So that was something that I was really was part of just what made me who I was at the time. So the first strategy I want to share with you, I call come to your senses. And this strategy includes witnessing beauty and inspiration in everyday life, and also works with loosening ambition. So I'm going to tell you a few stories about how I've worked with that in my practice. So when I left New York and traveled the world, then my life became more beautifully complicated, as it happens with so many of us. I gave birth to my daughter Celeste, who to this day still remains my most magnificent creation. I cannot get any better than that. My husband went back to grad school in sculpture at RISD in his mid 40s. I was holding down a lot of teaching jobs to make ends meet. And I felt like things were starting to unravel. Like I couldn't hike out to these like beautiful vistas anymore, so much to paint. And then, although I was still getting to my studio sporadically, I started to lose my flow, my momentum, and I started to lose a little bit of hope. So then I had a career change, and my 10-year commute to teach at the School of the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston came to an end. Um, Luckily, this coincided with my deepening meditation practice. Slowing down, I was learning to slow down and see that even the most mundane aspects of everyday life could be inspiring. This also revealed that I had been running at an aggressive pace for far too long. It was definitely time to come to my senses. So I want to share this Rumi quote with you. Flow down and down in widening rings of being. Move outside the tangle of fear thinking. Live in silence, but listen to me for one moment. Quit being sad. Hear blessings dropping their blossoms around you. So my job ending didn't exactly feel like a blessing at the time, but I tried to make the most of it. And the first thing I want to show you in terms of connecting with the senses was this series that I did at that time. So for 10 years, I'd taken the same walk from Ruggles Station to the museum school. It had become kind of my thing. It was sort of slick. It was like reliable. Um, and, but now that it was ending, now that I knew I wasn't going to do it anymore, it became somehow poignant to me, like just this walk, this act of walking from the train to the studio. And so one morning I was getting off the train and I stuck this big piece of graphite in my jeans pocket. And in the front pocket of the jeans. And I held my sketchbook against the graphite, against the movement of my hip as I walked this walk I used to always take. And I did this every day that I took the journey for the last few weeks of working at the museum school. And I'd arrive at the studio after doing this hip drawing, and I'd pull the sketch out and it would reveal this, like, I was just like a little kid. It was always like super exciting. I never knew what I would get. It was like little secrets born from like friction and movement. And it was a different sort of figure drawing, right? It was one that I couldn't control. It was so liberating. It was a ritual with a temporal and spatial system. I don't even know how I thought to do it. It just one day it dawned on me. It was awakening the beauty in me, in awakening the beauty for me of the possibility of the beauty of this tactile drawing. So working in a ritual series with a numerical or temporal parameter became more and more interesting to me. It took the onus off creating one masterpiece. It was a record of an investigation over time of multiple pieces. And these pieces would speak to each other and have a relationship. And the relationship would reveal, how the process was evolving. So I started to look for other places where a ritual in a time frame, maybe in a particular place, might feel inspiring. So one morning I woke up and I was just struck, like out of the blue, by how beautiful my bed sheets were. Like it just was like this aha moment. I was like, "Oh my gosh, like they're kind of gorgeous in the morning light." So I decided that for 31 days, for an entire month, I would photograph my bed every morning at the same time, from the same angle. And it slowly became this like diaristic project about relationship, about sleep. And and I created these 31 photographs and I love them. And that could have been the piece, but I was curious about what it could become, what it could become beyond the photographs. So after much experimentation, I arrived at combining 3 new materials for the first time. I drew the beds on frosted mylar with fountain pen. I dissolved the pen lines with iridescent ink. And this process taught me what it needed to be. I didn't know beforehand, but this process taught me what it needed to be. The new materials transformed the images in ways I would have never expected. They began to tell a story that was that really expanded beyond what I started out saying. So that the beds became somewhat ambiguous. They started to feel like glaciers melting. Suddenly it became about temperature. Maybe it was about a relationship. And it was really me like slowing down and recognizing the extraordinary nature of ordinary life that allowed this kind of magic to happen. Returning to a potent ritual again and again, well, for me, was creating a new momentum with my creative habit. The structure of the ritual and a time frame also resonated with my meditation practice. Having some sort of temporal container for the work, for a body of work, like a time frame, was to me kind of like a percolator, so that the deepening of flavor in the practice and the meaning became more and more kind of delicious to me. So I started to wonder if there was a way to introduce this kind of gentle practice to my, I guess you could call it like rather romantic approach to landscape painting. Like, how could maybe this ritual practice ease, my ambition a little bit within that? So, how about a puppy? Um, you might not think that has much to do with what I'm talking about, but you'll just listen. So enter Captain, Captain, our apricot mini Labradoodle. So anyone who knows, who's had a puppy knows how much work it is. And so that was a new element of my life. And I tried to look on the bright side. I thought, I could be one of those people who like runs with her dog. Like I could get really fit, and I imagined us like running down the boulevard and, just having this fabulous fit relationship. And well, it turned out the Captain was not a runner, and she wasn't even really a linear walker. In fact, she just sometimes didn't want to walk at all. So usually when we'd leave the house, she'd get as far as the end of the driveway and she'd just sit down and she wouldn't budge. And, It was, I have to admit, kind of exasperating sometimes because, you only have so much time to walk the dog and she's not moving. Um, and then just one day, for some reason, I just decided not to push it. I just decided to stand there and silently watch her. And when I did that, I noticed that her little like milk chocolate nose was sniffing the air intensely. And it sometimes took several minutes for her to do this. And finally, she'd look at me and with a subtle nod, she would tell me she's ready to walk. And I realized like I always had some sort of destination in my mind, like a preconceived route, whether it was in my life or in my artwork. And I thought, drop it. Why should I impose my human agenda on an animal? She loves what she loves. And shouldn't she be able to navigate her own experience? I remembered the sage advice of the poet Mary Oliver when she wrote, "Let the soft animal of your body love what it loves." And I let Captain do that. So, what does this have to do with making art? Well, it's a very good question. So, this slowing down opened up a whole new avenue of inspiration for my paintings. I used to take my neighborhood for granted, but I gradually, through this slowing down, became captivated by little spaces between houses, flowering trees, like everyday spaces that I was moving too quickly to appreciate before. I was starting to pay attention. I was becoming increasingly mindful. So, what initially I experienced as an obstacle became a doorway. I decided that I would try and create 108 small gouache studies. Each would be a meditation. Like each piece in and of itself would be a meditation, and it would all be sort of places I traveled to or visited and starting in my neighborhood. And that numerical goal, again, kind of like a ritual, was useful to me. Although I didn't give myself a time frame, it was satisfying to check off the little dots on the wall and know the work was accumulating. Sometimes when the weather was bad, I'd just work from the dashboard in my car. And, these studies, they just felt joyous and they felt playful. And I actually just wanted to do them all the time. So I started to include a sensory centering in my process to help me arrive in the moment before I painted. I would ask myself, what are 5 things you see? And if you can see in the little journal page here, you see how I would sort of warm up to work outdoors. I would ask myself, what are 5 things you see? What are maybe 3 things you hear? 2 things you smell? 1 thing you feel? And then I'd often write a haiku. This helped me continue to loosen my ambition. And it created a gap between myself and my habitual agenda of just jumping in, starting something because, I want to, make it. I only have a certain amount of time. I'm just going to knock out a painting. And in doing this, I felt my practice start to feel enriched. I could feel myself more connected with where I was, and I could feel myself making work that felt more authentically driven because of this slowing down. So, loosening ambition, collecting data, stop being so precious, being a maker. This gentleness now and this sensory centering really influences my work wherever I go. So most of these images are done in Italy. There's a lot of haikus written on them. There's a lot of color data. And on the lower left, the haiku is, this was in a cork forest in Italy. The velvet darkness, mystery seduces me, rushing sound of stream. So in writing that before I start my painting or drawing, I'm actually brought into the distillation of exactly what's going on in that moment. And that was really a pivotal point for me. So now I think of painting in a way like collecting data from the natural world. It's less precious. I'm just a maker. I'm taking the artist out of the equation. I'm just making things. And even just saying that makes me feel much more liberated. So I'd have to say that my pup revealed to me a world that I had only caught glimpses of in the past. So look out for your teachers, because you never know where they may turn up. In the studio, all these little studies, these 108 studies, started to translate into larger paintings. And these paintings were based on memory and the sort of the incidental painterly effects that sometimes happen when you're working quickly outdoors in water-based media. So without photographing the location, I only took away the impression in paint. And for me, having a photo of the site, and sometimes referring to it, um, I feel like it knocks the wind out of the memory, encapsulating it into some kind of truth. Like, it's a photo, there's the truth. And working from a combination of memory and these little studies really allowed mystery for me and room to improvise. So I was paying attention. I was learning to pay attention. Life and these incredible beings in it were revealing themselves as profound teachers. And this gave my life and my creative practice a new meaning and purpose beyond ambition and preconceived agenda. I was slowing down and like sketching my daughter sleeping on the couch or sketching my dog in a free moment, rather than being distracted by all the things going on around me all the time. So coming to our senses was the first strategy. And the second strategy really has to do with a little bit more speaking about a daily ritual practice. Trusting that process will erode obstacles, that a daily practice could build confidence and momentum and more intimacy and meaning in the work. So I found myself moving from kind of looser ideas, working with 108 images or working when I had the inspiration to work. I found myself getting more and more interested in like the grounding effects of an actual daily month-long commitment to practice. I mean, we all have these rituals, right? Like whether it's like making our coffee in the morning or kissing our kids goodnight before they go to bed or brushing our teeth on a good day. Um, so I knew I had rituals I did on a daily basis that, are a little bit of a training ground. But what would happen um, if I practiced that with my painting or with my drawing? Um, I learned from the previous work with that, with the beds and also with um, the 108 drawings and paintings, the meditations. I learned that consistent creative ritual was definitely helping me erode obstacles that historically had gotten between me and the making. I also knew that a regular practice was building my momentum and my confidence as a maker. I was getting more intimate with the meaning in my work. So the anchor of a daily ritual of making, there are some things that I found helpful. So setting a time frame, like, are you going to do a daily practice for a week? Are you going to do a daily practice for a month? Are you going to do a daily practice for a year? Like, what's it going to be? Just set out some kind of time frame for yourself. I also considered what I call creative restraints. So in other words, like if I had a month-long practice and I sat down every day and I said, well, I could do it, whatever the heck I want, I would find that very hard because there are so many possibilities. So I created some, and I'll talk about them, some ground rules for the practice that narrowed down the possibilities to make it easier to enter the practice. Make it doable, even fun. Committing to gentleness, because, if you're going after 31 days of making, there's a good chance there's going to be a few of those days where you don't get to it. And then you get to practice being gentle with yourself, which I think is one of the hardest things to practice. Pay attention, let the process be the teacher. Where you start day one might be really different from where you are on day 29. And trust that through repetition, magic will arise. So this is a little shot of my palette area in my studio. And Twyla Tharp, in her Creative Habit, wrote this, which I think is really wonderful. There's no ideal condition for creativity. What works for one person is useless for another. The only criterion is to make it easy on yourself. Find a working environment where the prospect of wrestling with your muse doesn't scare you and doesn't shut you down. I think that's incredibly sage advice. So I set out to do these month-long projects, and I've been doing them for a while now. This was one of my favorites, landscape collage from memory. So I had rules. I was just going to use cut or torn paper, and I made a little accordion book to fill so I could feel it filling, right? I was able to work with this, and I worked from memory, not photographs. So I would think about a place I saw on that day, and then at night I would just rip paper and try to recreate a version of that in my little accordion book. And each of these month-long practices has taught me lessons. The work has taught me incredible lessons. In this practice, I actually learned that I could trust my remembering. I don't have to take a photograph. I also learned about my love of paper, and I learned about the beauty in the remnants of process, and that less is more, how simplification can be so incredibly beautiful. So I had a lot of momentum going, and then I call it the pandemic pivot point, where creative restraint was helpful, and I really had to adapt because suddenly I could no longer go to my studio on the left there in an old lace mill down the hill. It was just, I felt like maybe it would be too dangerous. And I was ended up having to work at home in my office space or on my dining room table because we were pretty much in shutdown around here. And it turned out that these creative rituals that I was increasingly intrigued by, these daily practices, became even more significant for me as these essential anchors at a very uncertain time. Because I couldn't be in my studio, or even at times even feel safe going outdoors, I had to adapt, I had to pivot. Like, what else could I do, right? So I felt like without the anchor of a daily practice, there was nothing to come back to, nothing to come home to. And it really kept me tethered, and still does, to some sort of hope and flow. And it also helped me know what day it was, because there were times when in the thick of it where that was a little bit hard to know. So this idea, even, as the pandemic started, this daily practice was really a gift for me. So I just want to show you a couple of the ones I did during the pandemic. So haiku paintings. So I made about 30 or 31 of these little haiku paintings, and the rules were, so these were my creative constraints, daily haiku that I wrote from something that happened that day would inspire an image. I would draw a linear drawing with my eyes closed, a contour drawing, and then I'd use a limited palette to paint it in. And the lessons I learned was, again, how powerful haiku is as a way to arrive in the moment, to distill all the distractions and just simplify. I learned to let go. I learned, again, to trust in memory and also to feel color. And for me, what was so fascinating was that, you think, oh, I'm not going to remember things. But when you actually start to draw and move the hand, even with the eyes closed, the memory kind of unfolds and reveals itself. And it was always a surprise when I would open my eyes. So these were really healing, satisfying pieces that I did for an entire month. Another practice I did during the pandemic was called Feel the Mark. And I took inspiration from Julie Moretu, the quote, "I'm not trying to spell out a story. I still think you feel the painting. And the reason you read the mark is because you feel the mark." So these drawings were done in response to actually the death of my pup Captain. And what I did was, she died during the pandemic, which was really tough. And in many ways, dealing with grief, I think one often wants to avoid the feeling, but I decided that every day I would make a drawing from a memory of her, and they'd all be on paper bags that we had in the apartment. And that I would close my eyes and with my non-dominant hand, think of something about her, draw until the feeling ended. And that sort of arc of feeling was what created these drawings. And the lessons I learned was that, I made the drawings and then I thought, what if I colored in some of the positive spaces and then turned them into cutouts? And, that started to speak to surrendering to the evolution of a piece. And the remnants ended up becoming so beautiful. And the silhouettes had to do with something around removing something like the loss, but then the playfulness of the remnants of what were left behind. So this started to speak to being in nothingness and was actually like an incredible catalyst for my grief and healing. And then the last one I wanted to highlight is one I'm actually working on right now. And I'm doing this in conjunction. Some of these I've done in conjunction with a group of people that I'm about to speak about. But this piece is called Tethered. It's a month-long practice for the month of April. And the practice is I created these little sculptures by sewing Captain's toys together, her old toys. And I kind of sewed them and wrapped ribbon around them. And then I threw them down and did drawings of them on translucent vellum. And each week I sewed a new creature and laid the layers of vellum over each other. And so what I found and what I'm finding is this playful act of where materials start to embody emotion, and that the most recent drawings laying on top start to push back the older drawings and start to speak to layers of memory. And it's also about letting go and play and beauty in the process. So these are all these lessons I've learned from having a ritual daily practice. And what I wanted to speak to for the third strategy is creative community, because I couldn't have done some of these daily practices during the pandemic without a creative community. Creative community creates accountability. You show up, and it also really helps to facilitate hope and flow. So taking a class online or in person, I mean, Concord Art, my goodness, like how incredible it was that they pivoted and created a platform and a whole new platform, many teachers and many administrators never having to do this before ever, but allowed us to teach and allowed us to learn within this incredible community. So that was huge. And so many of us took advantage of that. So taking a class creates creative community. You could attend a figure drawing group, make dates to sketch with a friend, create a monthly critique group, or find a mentor. These are all things that one could do to create creative community. And it's so incredibly important. So working with Concord over the pandemic has been really wonderful. And I have one other thing I want to talk about, which is something in addition to Concord that I started, which I call the project. So the project is something I started last spring, really. There have been 5 of them since the start of the pandemic. And it's a month-long creative practice where artists commit to making for 1 month with me. And each week we submit our work and talk about it, and it's a communal commitment. It keeps us tethered to community, accountability, momentum, hope, and flow. And this quote I love because it's sort of like the vibe of what we do. Practice does not make perfect. Practice helps you abandon aggressive notions of perfection, and then you can make progress. Progress is better than perfection because it's real. So I wanted to highlight a few of the artists that did the project with me because as much as I enjoy sharing my own experience with a ritual practice, I think it's really interesting to hear from a diverse a group of makers who are working in this way. So I could have highlighted so many people who worked with me in this way over this last year, but I chose 7 because these 7 artists they kind of reveal a diversity of approaches to creative practice, and each artist takeaway was really unique. So we're just going to look at a few of these artists and honor that practice, knowing that we all have our own way in. So here Kathleen says, amidst a year of historic upheaval and uncertainty, I decided on a challenging and grounding daily haiku project designed expressly to move me through dark, cold January. I found inspiration in my lively circle of text messaging, female friends and family that I call my sisterhood. Our texts commented on world events and also referenced nature and daily life from food to fashion. I decided to mine these texts for language for daily haikus. Daily composition sharpened perception and encouraged reflection. My 31 January haikus are comic, tragic, and everything in between. I visually presented my composed haikus inside blue text message bubbles, ghosting their original text dialogues in black and white background. I sent these completed works out to my sisterhood each day and the January project each week. Recycling created yet another round of meaningful messaging. By mid-month, we were reacting and laughing over this project, which sustained me through January's end and brought all of us closer. Carol says, by January 2021, I'd been singing the alphabet song for 10 months each time I washed my hands. What I knew when I started the month practice was I wanted to use one letter of the alphabet each day to play with their shapes, use colored pencils, watercolor, and some vague thoughts about collage. That was hard enough to determine in the midst of a rising COVID case count in New York City. As days went on, I found myself opening up more and more to what the potential of the letter of the day might become. I'd wake up with a spark of an idea and sit down to work, spending more and more time on the images each day. Collage became a reality, and with it, a fascination with shapes cut and those left behind. There was joy, curiosity, and experimentation in this, not all the time, but fairly consistently. What a great anchor the practice was, something much needed during cold days of little daylight, and having a virtual community of artists to share with forged much needed connections as well. I was not alone. Carol says, during the pandemic, I found it difficult to engage in any kind of studio practice. By setting out some simple goals and routines, I found comfort and inspiration. The comfort of food triggered memories of places I'd been and augmented meditation as I set out to document food I'd eaten as I traveled, as well as what I'd prepared and shared with my husband. The comfort of food was also shared when I collaborated with a friend to document her weekly order from a Middle Eastern caterer. It gave me something to look forward to each week, the photo and the menu and feedback from my friend and the chef. This expansion to outside influence has inspired future initiatives such as collaborating on a cookbook or producing food paintings a la Wayne Thiebaud or Gina Beavers. Sparkler drawings. Kathy says, having a lit sparkler in hand, transports me back to my childhood, July 4th on the beach in New Jersey. I'd created my very first lit sparkler image, a happy birthday greeting for a relative a few weeks before the start of the January project. The physical act of drawing in the air using your whole body with a lit sparkler was liberating, just downright fun. That's something I needed during COVID lockdown. My husband agreed to be the photographer and videographer. We couldn't wait for each evening to come around and set up in the backyard. It took over our lunchtime conversation. What were we going to be photographing that evening? I rehearsed each drawing before it was photographed with a long exposure. With the image I wanted to draw in my head, the process became a dance that lasted about a minute, the length of a lit sparkler. One idea flowed into the next, from figures, portraits, landscapes, and still life, and even images from Dancing to Chubby Checker's Twist Again. The images were imported to Procreate on the iPad to be manipulated. The project brought so many joyful responses from the January project participants. It was an uplifting experience that brought inner joy and balance to my spirit. Sheila says, developing a daily creative practice has enabled me to explore more freely and joyfully than ever before. Gone was the paralysis of procrastination, setting up, formatting, finding a focus, followed by a fear of failure. Will I create anything artful? In its place came a feeling of pure, undistracted process and media exploration. Risk became opportunity, tension became relaxed engagement, work became play. The result, discovering fresh new approaches to media and techniques that led me to unfamiliar but often exciting new directions in my work and in my self-understanding. And we just have a couple more. One, Mimi. Ground rules for a daily practice are just different. Just do something, create something. Don't struggle with preconceived ideas about the eventual work. I worked hard not to be judgmental about each day's output, where she took a cork tree image and painted just a section of it each day. Work in the moment. Each day's work is sufficient in and of itself. You never know what new ideas and approaches will evolve along the way. For me, for example, the cork tree gave rise to different possibilities and ways of combining different images and moments. I thought the approach I took was a big departure from my past way of working. Now I realize I'd been exploring working this way, creating the mosaic or joining different images to create an effect for many years. The daily practice project crystallized it for me. Works produced in a daily practice can come together in surprising ways and spark ideas about different directions to explore. Having so many new ideas is very energizing. It makes me excited about trying these things. Is that the essence of hope? Some keywords for me from a daily practice: non-judgment, work fast, don't think about it, just get into doing it, be open to the ideas, curiosity, explore and learn. Resilience, step back and recognize what you did and how it all goes together. Eagerness to try more. And then the last student, Laura, when I started the What's in the Fridge series, a daily ritual of painting the containers of food in my refrigerator, I experienced anxiety around food security due to the pandemic. Borders were closed, delivery services hadn't quite kicked in where I lived, and thoughts drifted towards saving the precious food that was left and stretching each meal. That in turn led to a trigger each time I opened the fridge as the contents emptied or spoiled. So I started photographing the contents each day, sometimes with awareness of composition and other times blindly. I made some quick sketches, some blind contour, and turned to watercolor paint to bring joy. Looking back, this was a highly transformational experience, turning my anxiety into appreciation and hope, and moving from worry to resilience as I focused my energy on capturing the form and colors of the mostly glass containers that awaited representation on the page. So what my practice and witnessing the practice of others has really taught me is slow down and feel and drop down out of the intellect into the senses. Develop a daily ritual of making you can actually sustain, creating buoyancy in challenging times. Build a creative habit to cultivate flow and in turn, hope. Hope fuels us and gives us the strength to be unconditionally present. Hope and flow give us the stamina to burn through obstacles that obscure our true potential. Making is self-care, and self-care is a radical act. The nourishment of making gives us the inspiration to show up as our best selves. And creative community and interconnection is essential for momentum and joy. And I want to finish on what Amanda Gorman said. When the day comes, we step out of the shade, aflame and unafraid. The new dawn blooms as we free it, for there is always light if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it. Okay.
Thank you, Amy. I'm going to clap for you because I'm sure everyone else, yeah, everyone's clapping in their individual Zoom windows.
Yay, thank you. I'm sorry, I kind of went almost right up to 8 o'clock, but
Please do not apologize.
I hope we have time maybe for a few questions.
Yes, definitely. Of course, people understand if they have to go, they can go. We're going to have the recording on our YouTube later, so they can always come back and watch. But I will start with the questions. And the first question is from Mimi Maxsound, who asks about the 108 painting series. What's the significance of that number 108? How did you choose that amount?
Yeah, so 108 is a significant number in Buddhist meditation practice. And so that was a number that I chose, and I felt like it dovetailed well with the fact that I was sort of considering each of these paintings a meditation. It had a certain short time frame. It was about a distillation of a moment. So 108 was a rather symbolic thing.
And then our next question says, how soon after you uncovered a process did you use it in your teaching?
That's a good question. It varies because, sometimes processes you uncover, they feel kind of like mysterious and you don't quite understand them. And I would feel hesitant to like just say, hey, let's try this. But sometimes something feels really sparky. And, I feel like as a maker, and a teacher, like my making and my discoveries as I'm making really help me energize my teaching. So sometimes I'll arrive at something and I'll be like, guys, I just tried this the other day and let's try it, And so there's a lot of energy around that I think sometimes can be quite effective in the teaching practice. So it kind of, I don't have a rule about it, but I try to perceive the best ones to share and when.
Yeah. So we have a question from Mark that says, how do you consider drawing versus painting?
Yeah, so good question. So,
I think someone shared their screen by accident.
Oh, okay.
Keep going.
Yeah, so I've always sort of historically thought of drawing as kind of like linear, like a dry media or pen and ink. But I actually, and painting being more about sort of luscious shapes and sort of more fluid mark making. But actually, I really feel like I've blurred those zones in my work, and that I often, sometimes I'll actually draw with a pencil with my non-dominant hand while painting with a brush in my dominant hand simultaneously. So they'll kind of like activate each other and kind of interfere with each other to create tension. And so I'm really actually interested in where drawing meets painting and blurring the boundaries between those two. So I hesitate to define one versus the other because I think they sometimes intertwine and can actually create like almost like a new thing.
And this question is for me. I'm curious, what are you working on now? What's getting you excited? Where are you heading in the studio these days?
Yeah, so I have been, working on this Tethered project where I've been sewing these toys together. And I'm also working on some large scale paintings that are related to that. And I'm simultaneously about to start a new collage practice using containers that I've collected during the pandemic and superimposing them on each other. So it's like a record of consumption, but also the beauty of shapes interacting with each other. And as soon as the weather clears, I'm excited to get back outside and do some work out in the elements again.
Yeah,
Mhm.
definitely. I know a lot of us are feeling that.
Yep.
I think we have one last question from Hans. Do you have any information available for things you discovered to get a project group going and functioning well? What kind of advice would you offer to people interested in that?
Yeah. So, so with the last 5 projects I developed over this past year, it's evolved a lot, and I do have resources, and I really try to just hold the space and collect and organize the images, and people involved in it are really like the engine, you know. But one resource that I found incredibly helpful is actually something that Marissa introduced me to, which is Padlet. It's a website where it's free to join, and everyone can contribute to a gallery basically. And it's really easy to share that and just display the work on a screen. So that is, I think for anyone who wants to just like say, hey, group of maker friends, be really motivational to get together and just share our work once a month. Padlet would be like a really fabulous format for that.
And just so everyone knows, it's Padlet, it's in the chat. If you've taken a class at Concord Art, you probably know it, but if you
Probably know it.
haven't, yeah. It's Padlet, like pad of paper, let me in, .com.
Right, right.
And I think that will bring us right to the end of the questions. I'll just share with you, Amy, because I know you haven't had time to look at the chat, but everyone is thanking you for an inspirational talk. People are leaving excited to get to their studio work. You made me tear up a little bit when you talked about your dog, I'm not gonna lie. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Well,
other than that, thank you so much. Thank you for being here and sharing.
well, I just actually wanted to just
Yeah.
express my gratitude to Concord Art, but also I can't really see everyone. I wish I could, but like if I could, I would give you just a big thank you for coming. And it makes me feel so good that people are interested in hearing what I have to say, and I really consider it an honor to like be invited to talk. So thank you, and I hope that at some point we'll be able to be together in person in a workshop or doing something. So in the meantime, please everyone stay well, and yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Amy.
That was
And
awesome, Amy. Can I
Thank
take
you,
this
Amy.
opportunity to promote your, your workshop in July?